Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. Today we're checking out why the Battle of Dunkirk was the major turning point in World War II.
The Nazis have French and British forces surrounded at Dunkirk. Once Hitler gives the orders for German troops and tanks to advance, he'll have won the war. Luftwaffe bombers continuously drop their payloads on the evacuation ships. Fighter planes fall from the sky like fiery shooting stars. Intense urban warfare demolishes entire towns along the Dunkirk border. All seems lost to the Allies, yet the mad dictator hesitates. Without the Führer giving the order to overrun the remaining Allied forces, the Nazi war machine could not finish what they started.
Why didn't he?
Dunkirk will be both Germany's greatest victory and the biggest mistake of World War II.
So, because Hitler hesitated, he lost the war. This happened in 1940. Didn't World War II end in 1945? 1939 to 1945. He could have won in 1940.
September 1st, 1939. Nazi Germany invades Poland. Their heavily armored tanks, well-supplied troops, and lightning-fast aircraft quickly sweep across the landscape and secure victory for the Third Reich. The rest of the world watches in horror as Adolf Hitler does the unthinkable and brings everyone to the brink of war. France, Britain, the Netherlands, and Belgium immediately begin preparing for an attack that will inevitably come from the power-hungry dictator to the east. September 3rd, 1939. France declares war on Germany. All of their allies, including Britain, are now part of the unfolding conflict in Europe, whether they want to be or not. In a few days, light skirmishes will break out along the French-German border. It's as if Hitler is probing the French defensive line, testing it for weakness. The Nazis will find a way into France, but it's nowhere near where the Allies expect it to come from. For the next 6 months, there seems to be an eerily calm that settles just before the storm breaks out across Europe. This is known as the Phony War. The small skirmishes along the French border appear to be little more than idle threats. The French command orders their forces to fall back behind the Maginot Line to provide them with slightly more protection. German U-boats patrol the waters of the English Channel, North Sea, and the Atlantic. They hunt for any unguarded supply ships that may be aiding their enemy in the war that's to come. While tensions rise across the continent, Adolf Hitler reaches out to the other powers in Europe to see if there's any chance of maintaining peace, while also allowing him to keep Poland and other slight border gains made during this time. The response is not what he'd hoped. The British concoct a plan to hurt the Nazi war machine and allow them to build up their forces for when war does break out.
This sounds a lot like Russia and Ukraine.
In secret, the Allies start to place mines in the harbors of Norway, which is a neutral country in the dispute. By placing mines in Norwegian ports, Britain is risking lighting a match that could ignite the powder keg of war in Europe, but Germany must be stopped at all costs. Germany is receiving a massive amount of coal from Norway, and the disruption of this critical resource should slow down the Nazis' military growth. April 7th, 1940. Adolf Hitler hears rumors of the Allies' plans to place mines in Norway to cut off one of his most vital supply lines. For many months, German military strategists have been planning the best way to overtake Western Europe and bring the Allies to their knees. April 9th, 1940. The sun rises on the Danish-German border. It's a quiet morning. A gentle spring breeze wisps through the fields, gently blowing tall grass from side to side.
Here it comes.
It's peaceful in the countryside. But along the water, mechanical beasts make their way into Copenhagen's ports. The Nazis first deploy their warships into the harbors of Denmark. Then they deploy their tanks, which plow through the Danish countryside, and dispatch the minimal resistance they encounter. The sound of roaring engines from the Luftwaffe fills the sky over Norway and signals the country is now under German occupation. The planes drop paratroopers who quickly capture major ports and cities. With the invasion of Norway and Denmark underway, the Netherlands and Belgium know they're next. They join forces along with the French and British to fortify their eastern borders, to stop the onslaught of the Nazis that are knocking on their doors. 900,000 troops from the Netherlands and Belgium are deployed to the border. Their combined air forces number around 900 planes, almost all of which are obsolete compared to the much larger and vastly superior Nazi Luftwaffe. Germany has around 3.5 million troops, 5,500 aircraft, and 10 panzer divisions ready to fight the most bloody war the world will ever see.
What's a panzer division? Oh, armored tanks.
One of the key differences between Nazi military strategy and that of the Allies is that they have their tanks in their own divisions. The Allies have their tanks dispersed between different infantry units. This will be a fatal flaw in the battles to come, as Nazi panzers take advantage of this and decimate entire battalions of Allied infantry and tanks. May 10, 1940. Adolf Hitler sits in Nazi command with his generals. He decides that the time has come to attack. After numerous battle scenarios, Hitler chooses Lieutenant General Erich von Manstein's tactic to launch an invasion along Germany's western front with three main forces. The Nazis wait for updates as their men begin a unified attack into Allied territory. General Wilhelm von Lieb commands Army Group C as it slams against French defenses along the Maginot Line. This will be the hardest line to break for the Nazis, but the plan doesn't necessarily hinge on Army Corps C's success.
Look at that guy. Look at the rage and hate in his face.
Hitler and his generals know that they can throw everything they have at the French border and likely come out on top, but it'll cost them an unfathomable amount of soldiers and resources.
Oh, they don't care.
Instead, Wilhelm von Lieb and his force just need to keep the French busy, while the other two Nazi forces carry out their missions. General Theodor von Bock commands Army Group B. He's tasked with invading Belgium and the Netherlands. His goal is to make it to the English Channel and then push west to control the ports and coastal regions of Northern Europe. Army Group B will meet the second most resistance, as the bulk of the Belgian and Dutch forces are concentrated along the Grebe and Peel line.
It's all very logical. You gotta hand it to the Nazis that they were very strategic, sorry to say.
As Army Group B pushes further west, the Allied forces fall right into the Nazis' trap. Hitler's military strategists predicted that if Allied forces in the north became overwhelmed, the Allies would send reinforcements to aid in the protection of the coast. This causes Allied forces to be drawn forward into Belgium, leaving a key region open for the Nazis to pass through. It's this decision that allows Germany to carry out the final part of their plan.
So they wanted to get through France, so they increased the pressure in the north so that the Allies would move their troops to the north, and then they got through France. It seems very basic, but I mean kind of brilliant. It feels like at this point the Allied forces were being more reactionary while the Nazis were taking the lead.
It'll also lead to a German victory at the Battle of Dunkirk. As the French are fighting to hold the line against General Wilhelm von Lieb, the remaining Allied forces are repositioned to meet General Theodor von Bock and his army in the north. At the same time, General Gerd von Rundstedt leads Army Group A through the Ardennes to penetrate the Allied defensive lines. Army Group A consists of 1.5 million soldiers and over 1,500 tanks. The Nazi plan of attack goes exactly according to plan. The Allies let themselves fall right into the trap of the Germans by splitting their forces to the north and south. This leaves a gap straight through Luxembourg and southern Belgium, where Army Group A meets little resistance.
Okay, so before I said France, but it's through Luxembourg. Okay. So the Allied troops went north and south, which left a weakness in the middle through Luxembourg. Okay.
There is now no way to stop the spread of Nazi forces from Army Group B, since reinforcements from the south can't reach the northern line of defense. Army Group A demolishes any resistance they come across while rolling through the Ardennes forests and hilly landscape. The geography of the region is the only thing slowing them down, but it doesn't stop them. The Allies truly believed that there was no way Hitler would send his troops through the Ardennes because of the landscape. Unfortunately, they were wrong, and now Germany is dominating the battlefield. May 11th, 19... Unfortunately, they were wrong.
Gardem? Through the Ardennes. What's Ardennes? It's a region of extensive forests, rough terrain, rolling hills, and ridges. Okay. Yeah, so that was probably really tough to get the tanks through.
And now Germany is dominating the battlefield. May 11th, 1940. British and French forces scramble to aid their allies to the north. They reinforce the middle of the Belgium countryside but fail to offer any relief along the coast. Army Group A continues its mission through the Ardennes to reach the French border and flank Allied forces to the south. Divisions within Army Group A scream across the Ardennes. Their target is the Meuse River, which they'll need to cross in order to enter France. May 13th, 1940. French and British units are stationed along the Meuse River. They await orders on where they'll be deployed next. Suddenly, Allied soldiers hear the roars of engines from across the river. Above them, white parachutes open like circular clouds drifting across the blue sky. The Nazi infantry breaks through the tree line. The Allied forces stationed across the Meuse River never expected to see Germans here. Word reached them that the Nazis were trying to pass through the Ardennes, but Allied command was sure it would take them several days to get through the rough terrain. In fact, they were so sure that Nazis wouldn't be able to get their tanks through the Ardennes that they didn't bother deploying anti-tank guns to the region. This turns out to be a huge error.
I mean, that's a logical decision, but it was just unfortunately wrong. How did they get the tanks across? Oh, by driving on the roads and dirt paths? No, that can't be it. So it looks like it just took a little bit of effort. I mean, it wasn't that hard.
May 14th, 1940. The Germans opened fire on the Allied troops. They're able to repel the Nazis until Panzer Group Kleist
That's not how you shoot a gun.
rushes across the river and breaches Allied lines. The Nazi tanks are fast, durable, and armed to the teeth. The few tanks the French and British forces have available to them are no match for the Panzer Division. Shells rain down like hellfire. Allied armor is torn through as their own bullets ricochet off the Panzer's armor. The Panzers move like lightning, and after a decisive battle, German forces enter France for the first time in World War II. The Nazis claim victory after victory. The Allied forces cannot stop them. And now that Panzer tanks and Nazi soldiers are on French soil, things are about to get even worse. The Battle of France has only been raging for 4 days, but during this time, the Nazis have been able to completely demolish much of Allied defenses. Now they'll break through the most heavily fortified front in France. Once the German Panzer Corps tore through Allied forces in Sedan, France, they were able to circle around behind the Maginot Line. Army Group C keeps up the pressure on the Western Front, while Nazi forces from Army Group A race south to surround the Allied troops. With the combined forces of Army Corps A and C, the Maginot Line falls, and France faces the real threat of Nazi occupation. May 15, 1940. French troops retreat toward Paris to try to defend their capital. Nazi tanks and troops are in hot pursuit. Paris will fall in time, but that battle will not determine the outcome of the war. However, the Battle of Dunkirk and the evacuation of soldiers across the English Channel will play a pivotal role in the years to come. The Battle of France and the coming Battle of Dunkirk will both be successful victories for Germany, but a crucial mistake is made, a mistake that will haunt Adolf Hitler for the rest of his life. Although much of the German forces from Army Group A push toward southern France, a sizable portion heads west and then north to block the escape of retreating French and British forces. Army Group B continues pushing Allied forces toward Dunkirk, putting their backs against the English Channel. Now that Army Group A has encircled them, the Allies have nowhere to go but across the Channel and into Britain if they have any hope of saving the men that are now stuck in Dunkirk. While the Nazis close in on French and British forces from all sides, the Dutch surrender after a heavy bombing campaign on Rotterdam. Heinz Guderian's 19th Panzer Corps is moving at lightning speed across the middle of France, causing the German line to extend over 100 miles. This starts to worry Nazi command because if the Allies manage to launch a successful counterattack out of northern France, it'll be disastrous for the Germans. May 20th, 1940. Only days before Antwerp and Brussels fell to the Nazis. When this happened, the remainder of the Allied forces were pushed to the coastline of France, where there is literally nowhere to go. Around 1 million men are trapped between the British Channel and the Nazi legions that want nothing more than to crush them. Battles rage in the south of France as soldiers desperately try to want nothing.
1 million soldiers. 1 million soldiers are trapped. 1 million. I can't wrap my head around that. It's hard.
Where to go. Around 1 million men are trapped between the British Channel and the Nazi legions that want nothing more than to crush them. Battles rage in the south of France as soldiers desperately try to fend off the panzer divisions that are headed toward Paris. Communication between the southern forces and those stuck in the north of France has been severed. Each part of the Allied army is on its own. It seems as if the war is about to end right then and there, with the Nazis dominating much of Europe. The only hope for the Allies is to get their men across the Channel and regroup in Britain, but it'll take a miracle to move 1 million men before the Nazis breach Dunkirk. The Nazis begin pushing toward Dunkirk. The Allies set up defensive positions all around the region and fight with everything they've got to repel attack after attack from the unrelenting German tanks, soldiers, and planes. Their bravery allows them to slow the Nazi advance, but it does not stop it. The crushing pressure that German forces put on the Allied soldiers in northern France becomes unbearable. There just aren't enough ships to ferry the men off the European mainland and onto the shores of Britain. May 24th, 1940. The Allies are about to lose the war. Luftwaffe bombers and fighter planes strike defensive positions around Dunkirk, annihilating Allied troops and cannons. Then, something incredible happens. The relentless Nazi advance stops. Allied soldiers look at one another in disbelief as the panzer tanks sit idly on the front line of the battlefield. German soldiers watch from a safe distance as their enemy is stunned by the pause in the battle. The Allied lines hold around Dunkirk. The Nazis could easily reach the city in only a few hours if nothing stood in their way. All it would take was one panzer division to breach the Allied line of defense, and the war would be over. Yet no one moves. The Allies can't believe their luck. Allied command is informed of the Nazi halt and frantically tries to devise a plan to get their men out of the tight situation around Dunkirk. Back at the Nazi headquarters, Hitler's generals are giving their leader mixed messages. We can decimate their forces using only my Luftwaffe planes, thus eliminating the Allied threat without losing a single tank or infantry regiment, Hermann Göring exclaims. Both General Kleist and I agree with Göring, mein Führer. It would be a mistake to advance our troops further to Dunkirk. We are spread too thin, and the enemy could launch a counterattack that would break our lines. The British tanks entrenched at Arras pose a grave threat to the success of our mission, Gunther von Kluge chimes in. We also need to conserve our armored divisions for the next stage of the offensive. If we lose too many tanks to secure Dunkirk, our push into southern France could be hindered. And we should not forget that the end goal of all this is to create a Third Reich that spans from the Atlantic Ocean into Eastern Europe. At some point, we'll need to deal with the Soviets, General Gerd von Rundstedt states.
The Nazis could have won, but they were running low on troops, and they were looking to the future of a possible war with Russia. Kind of makes sense. But he could have won the war if he took the risk. Sometimes blind ambition is helpful. Sometimes being too strategic can make you lose an opportunity. 5 years later, you find yourself in a bunker, poisoning your wife and shooting yourself in the head. It's an age-old story.
Hitler sits quietly, thinking of what he should do next. Even though many of his top generals have told him to slow the assault into northern France, many warned that if Germany allows the British and French forces to escape across the English Channel, it could ultimately lose them the war. However, Adolf Hitler cannot forget what happened to the men he served with in World War I when they got bogged down in the marshy landscape of Flanders. This thought instills fear in the Führer that his tanks might become stuck and all will be lost. Then again, perhaps if he allows Britain to pull its men out of France, they might be more likely to enter into peace talks. Hitler would be more than happy to let Great Britain keep their little island momentarily if they stayed out of his affairs on the European continent. I cannot make such an important decision with haste, Hitler says to his generals. We will reconvene and discuss our choices in the days to come. Until then, our ground forces will remain halted outside Dunkirk.
Thank goodness for that German overanalyzation.
Many of the Nazi leaders in the room nod their approval. Others shake their heads in dismay. Adolf Hitler may have just handed the war to the Allies. May 26, 1940. As Hitler and his generals debate on what to do about the invasion of Dunkirk, the Allies work fast. When German ground forces were brought to a halt, Allied command ordered as many troops as possible retreat to Dunkirk for evacuation. Over 700 civilian ships are sent from Britain to Dunkirk to bring soldiers across the channel. Operation Dynamo has commenced, and it'll become the largest military evacuation of all time. That evening, Hitler makes up his mind. When reports start coming in that Allied soldiers are escaping across the channel, he has no choice but to unleash his ground forces and rush them toward Dunkirk as quickly as possible. The Luftwaffe tries to conduct bombing runs on the massive evacuation fleet that seems to have appeared overnight, but the British Royal Air Force claims air superiority for the moment. Dogfights break out in the sky over Dunkirk as ships ferry soldiers away from the Nazi threat. Not every ship makes it back to British shores. Both naval and civilian ships are used in the evacuation. Many are either damaged or destroyed by Nazi planes. British aircraft tried their best to take out as many bombers as possible, but the Nazi Luftwaffe seems to have an endless supply of aircraft with skilled pilots. May 27, 1940. After a night of bombing and air-to-air combat, the Luftwaffe returned to finish the job. The German aircraft swoop in and drop their payloads on the docks of Dunkirk harbor. This entire section of the city is destroyed. Admiral Bertram Ramsay is given overall command of the operation to evacuate Allied forces from Dunkirk. He tasks Captain William Tennant with overseeing the evacuation efforts on the shores of France. When Tennant arrives, he finds that the Allies can only evacuate from the beaches of Dunkirk, since the port has been completely destroyed. The makeshift fleet ferries just under 8,000 troops from Dunkirk to Britain in the first full day of evacuations. At the same time, the renewed German advance slams into heavy resistance.
8,000 out of 1 million? It's a good start, I guess.
Allied soldiers have had a few days to rest and know that the evacuation efforts hinge on their ability to hold the Nazi ground forces back. As reports come into the German high command, Hitler is furious that his forces aren't getting through the Allied lines. He orders another halt in the Nazis' attack, which buys the Allies more precious time. Hitler then redirects his forces further south to try to get around the Allied line of defense. The German tanks and soldiers end up being too much for the limited Allied forces, and they're slowly pushed back closer to Dunkirk. May 28, 1940. The Belgian army surrenders to Germany. This leaves the Nazi forces to the east with the task of dealing with hundreds of thousands of prisoners. The surrendering of Belgium is a blessing in disguise, as it greatly slows the Nazi advance along the coast toward Dunkirk. Clouds and smoke fill the sky, allowing the ships to continue their evacuation efforts, while hindering the sight of the Luftwaffe pilots. 17,800 troops are evacuated while their comrades hold the line against the Nazis. May 29, 1940. Adolf Hitler is inconsolable. He wants the Battle of Dunkirk won immediately. He screams at Hermann Göring to deliver on his promise to defeat the Allies using
Grab
the
a
German
gun,
Air
Hitler.
Force. Practically
Get down
every
there.
bomber and fighter available is launched and flies toward Dunkirk. They unleash an iron rain of bombs. Machine guns strafe the beaches as Allied soldiers are crammed into fishing and merchant boats. Thousands are slaughtered in the mayhem, but 47,000 soldiers make it safely to the shores of Britain. May 30th, 1940. Bad weather and low visibility hinder the German Luftwaffe's efforts to stop the evacuation of Allied soldiers once again. Almost 59,000 troops make it to safety across the English Channel.
More and more every
May
day.
31st, 1940. Throughout the evacuation during Operation Dynamo, a brave contingent of Allied forces hold the area around Lille, France. The Nazis have been trying to conquer this city. As if they push into Dunkirk without making sure that Allied soldiers holding Lille are dealt with, it might lead to devastating counterattacks. Nazi generals shout orders at their commanders as they desperately try to smash the Allied force holding the city. The men have been fighting valiantly, but on May 31st they are overwhelmed by the Nazis, who allocate even more forces to secure the city. The sacrifice of the soldiers at Lille allows thousands of soldiers to escape that might not have otherwise if the Germans had been able to focus solely on Dunkirk. When Lille falls, 35,000 troops are captured, but at that same time 68,000 men make it out of Dunkirk in the biggest evacuation day of the battle. June 1st, 1940. The weather clears up. Nazi airplanes wreak havoc on evacuation efforts. 4 destroyers and 27 ships are sunk. Thousands of lives are lost.
Wow.
Even still, the Allies evacuate around 62,500 men. June 2nd, 1940. 26,256 troops are evacuated from Dunkirk. German ground forces creep closer and closer to the city, while thousands of soldiers still need to be evacuated. Time is running out. June 3rd, 1940. Evacuation efforts are taking their toll on the ships, men, and sailors who are doing everything they can to save as many lives as possible. 26,700 Allied soldiers are rescued. The Nazis are within eyeshot of Dunkirk. The soldiers who are holding them back are sustaining heavy casualties. It'll not be long before the Germans are victorious. June 4th, 1940. A final round of 26,175 Allied soldiers are evacuated from the shores of Dunkirk. The Nazis enter the city just in time to see the last of the British ships sail away. It's a sight that signifies the failure of Adolf Hitler to act strategically during the battle. No one knew it then, but his orders to stop the German advance outside of Dunkirk while he assessed his options might have cost him the war in the end. Make no mistake, the Nazis were victorious at the Battle of France and the Battle of Dunkirk. They secured Dunkirk and with it captured 40,000 French soldiers. Another 40,000 British soldiers were also seized in the surrounding area. An even bigger win for the Nazis was that in the turmoil and expediency of the evacuation, the Allies left behind hundreds of field guns, anti-aircraft guns, and anti-tank guns. It's also estimated that the Germans were able to capture around 700 Allied tanks, which they used in their own battalions throughout the war. After the Battle of Dunkirk, German forces could focus on capturing the rest of France, including Paris, which is exactly what they did. Dunkirk and the Battle of France may have been the Nazis' greatest victory in World War II, but allowing so many British and French soldiers to escape may have cost them the war in the years to come.
Man, yeah, it seemed like one defeat after another until Dunkirk. I mean, technically Dunkirk was a win for the Nazis, but I think it was really brilliant of Winston Churchill to change the narrative around the Dunkirk evacuation and present it as a victory, because probably was really inspiring to the troops at the time. It's always fun to think of Adolf Hitler as being really pissed off and losing his mind. It makes me feel good, it makes me laugh. Really interesting video. If you've not seen the movie Dunkirk by Christopher Nolan, I highly recommend it. Some wonderful acting, excellent story. It's probably my personal favorite Christopher Nolan film. Really informative video. Thank you all for recommending. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Later.